Shattered trust, the first time Freya Winters held her phone in trembling hands. Staring at Harrison Porter's impossible request, she almost dropped it into her morning coffee. Outside her apartment window, Seattle's persistent rain provided a fitting backdrop to the storm brewing inside her. "I know it's a lot to ask," Harrison's voice had cracked when he called. "But there's no one else I trust. Trust, such a fragile thing." They'd known each other since college. 15 years of friendship that had weathered career changes, relationships, and his catastrophic marriage to Olivia. The divorce had left him wealthy but broken. The experimental cancer treatment that saved Olivia's life had rendered Harrison unable to father children naturally. And now, at 38, he wanted Freya to be his surrogate. Freya tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear and reread his follow-up email outlining the clinical details. IVF using his frozen sperm, a generous compensation package, the best medical care money could buy. Everything considered except emotions. "Ms. Winters," Dr. Rajan looked up from his tablet. "Are you certain about this arrangement?" The fertility specialist's office felt too bright, too sterile. Harrison sat beside her, his usually confident posture replaced by something hesitant. The software security company he'd built from nothing had made him a millionaire before 40, but money couldn't fix everything. "I am," Freya replied, ignoring the concerned look from the doctor. "Harrison and I have discussed everything." They hadn't. Not really. They hadn't discussed how Freya had declined a promotion that would have taken her to London because the thought of leaving Harrison behind felt impossible. They hadn't discussed the way her heart still raced when he called. He certainly hadn't. Discussed that beneath her carefully constructed friendship lay years of unspoken love. "It won't complicate things between us," Harrison had promised over dinner the previous week. His blue eyes, always so expressive, had been unreadable. "It's a medical procedure, not. You know, it won't mean anything." The words had stung more than Freya expected. After the appointment, Harrison drove her home in silence, his knuckles white against the steering wheel of his Tesla. "Thank you," he finally said as they pulled up to her building. "I can't express what this means to me." Freya nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. As a professor of literature, words were her life, yet none seemed adequate. For this moment, "I should go," she mumbled, reaching for the door handle. "Papers to grade." Harrison caught her wrist gently. "Freya, He stopped, conflict evident on his face. "You're the only constant in my life. After everything with Olivia, I couldn't bear to lose you too." "You won't," she promised, the lie bitter on her tongue. Because she already knew carrying his child would change everything, whether he acknowledged it or not. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Freya wondered if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life, or opened the door to the one thing she'd always wanted. Either way, there was no turning back now. Unspoken feelings, the first injection made Freya wince, not from pain, but from the strange intimacy of the moment. The hormone treatments that would prepare her body for pregnancy felt like crossing an invisible line. She sat on her bathroom floor. Afterward, arms wrapped around her knees, wondering how she'd agreed to this arrangement. Dr. Rajan had warned of mood swings, but nothing prepared Freya for the emotional tsunami. Every advertisement featuring babies made her eyes well with tears. Every time Harrison called to check in, her heart performed gymnastics that left her breathless and confused. "The embryo transfer is scheduled for Tuesday," she told him over coffee 3 weeks later. They met at their usual place, a small cafe where the barista knew their orders by heart. Harrison's Americano and her chai latte sat between them like proxies for their personalities. His, straightforward and intense, hers complex and nurturing. Harrison nodded, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. His company was launching a new security protocol, and he'd been working 16-hour days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, making the blue more pronounced against his pale skin. "I can move things around," he said, not looking up. "Do you need me there?" Freya stirred her chai, watching the spices swirl. "It's not required. But would you like me there?" This time he closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. The question hung between them. Of course she wanted him there. She wanted him everywhere, in the doctor's office holding her hand, in her apartment, sharing dinner, in her bed. But that wasn't their agreement. It might make things less clinical, she offered carefully. Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. I'll be there, he promised before answering the call and stepping outside. The embryo transfer was successful on the first attempt. Freya lay in the recovery room afterward, hands resting on her still flat stomach, imagining the microscopic possibility growing inside her. Harrison had held her hand during the procedure, his usually steady grip trembling slightly. We did it, he'd whispered when Dr. Rajan confirmed everything had gone perfectly. For a moment, Freya allowed herself to absorb the we, pretending they were like other couples in the fertility clinic, united by love instead of a contractual arrangement. The first 3 months passed in a blur of morning sickness and fatigue. Freya continued teaching her classes, grateful that her loose dresses hid the subtle changes in her body. Harrison sent daily text messages checking on her health, occasionally dropping off groceries or prepared meals from expensive restaurants. You don't have to do this, she told him when he appeared at her door with ginger tea and crackers during a particularly rough week. I want to, he replied, though his eyes darted around her apartment as if looking for escape routes. He never stayed longer than necessary, maintaining a careful physical distance at night. Alone in bed, Freya would read poetry aloud to the growing life inside her. Sonnets and free verse became her lullabies, words expressing what she couldn't say to Harrison, that somewhere between the doctor's appointments and prenatal vitamins, she was falling deeper in love with not just the baby, but the impossible dream of them becoming a real family. When the baby first kicked, Freya called. Harrison, without thinking, "Come over," she said quickly. He arrived in 20 minutes, panic evident on his face, until she guided his hand to her rounded belly. The moment the baby kicked against his palm, Harrison's expression transformed. Wonder replaced worry, and for a heartbeat, Freya saw something else there too, a longing that mirrored her own. But then his phone rang, breaking the spell. "Work," he explained, withdrawing his hand as if burned. "I should go." Freya watched him leave, cradling the physical evidence of their connection as she wondered why it wasn't enough to bridge the emotional distance between them. Empty promises. By the 6th month, Freya's body had transformed completely. Her slender frame now carried the distinctive curve of advanced pregnancy, making it impossible to hide the truth from her colleagues and students. The questions began. Tentative at first, then bolder as her silence was mistaken for openness. Is the father involved? Her department chair Julianne asked during lunch. Freya hesitated. Was Harrison involved? He paid the medical bills promptly. He attended the important ultrasounds, standing awkwardly in corners while technicians captured images of his growing child. He had begun converting the guest room in his downtown penthouse into a nursery, sending Freya photos of expensive furniture, and asking for her opinion in brief text messages, but he never touched her beyond necessary greetings. He never stayed for dinner despite her invitations. He never spoke directly to the baby the way she did, never laid his hands on her stomach, unless explicitly invited. It was as if he believed maintaining physical distance would somehow prevent emotional entanglement. It's complicated, Freya finally answered. Complicated didn't begin to cover it. At night, Freya would lie awake feeling the baby hiccup and roll beneath her ribs. She'd begun keeping a journal, letters to the child that told the truth. She couldn't say aloud how she'd loved Harrison for years, how she'd agreed to this arrangement, partly hoping it might open his eyes, how terrified she was of the moment she would have to hand over this child. She already loved fiercely. The 3rd trimester brought unexpected complications. Mild preeclampsia meant bed rest, which meant taking a leave of absence from teaching. Harrison hired a home health aide who visited daily, but the hours alone stretched endlessly. Freya's mother called from Florida, concerned. "You're doing this alone?" her mother asked, disapproval evident. "Where is this friend of yours?" "He's busy," Freya defended weakly. Harrison's company was negotiating a major government contract. The timing couldn't be worse. When he did visit, Her son brought work with him, setting up his laptop at her kitchen table while asking about her medical appointments. He seemed to grow more distant as her due date approached, his visits shorter and less frequent. "Have you thought about after the birth?" Freya asked one evening, unable to avoid the conversation any longer. She was 8 months pregnant, uncomfortable and emotional. Harrison looked up from his phone, startled. "Of course. The nursery is almost ready, and I've hired a night nurse for the first few months," Freya said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I meant us. What happens to us after?" The silence that followed felt suffocating. "Nothing changes," Harrison finally replied, his expression guarded. "You'll always be my best friend." "But everything has already changed," Freya whispered, tears threatening. "I'm carrying your child. I've put my life on hold. I wake up every morning feeling this baby move and knowing that soon I'll have to say goodbye to both of you." Harrison stood, running a hand through his hair in the nervous gesture she'd known for years. "That's not fair, Freya. We had an agreement. You knew what this meant from the beginning." "Did I?" she challenged. "Did you explain how it would feel to carry a child I'm not supposed to love? Did you consider what this would do to me too?" I should go," he said, gathering his things. "You should rest." He left without answering her questions, and Freya curled around her swollen belly, finally allowing herself to cry. The baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting her distress. "I know," she whispered, stroking the taut skin. "I know you can feel everything. I'm sorry." 2 weeks later, her water broke in the middle of the night. She called Harrison 4 times before giving up and calling an Uber to take her to the hospital. As contractions tore through her body, Freya faced the truth. She'd been avoiding. She would likely be doing this alone too. Unexpected awakening. 26 hours of labor ended with a tiny, red-faced scream that shattered and reassembled Freya's heart in an instant. The nurses placed the squirming bundle on her chest, and the world narrowed to this perfect 7-pound miracle. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting fingers and toes through tears of exhaustion and wonder. "I've been waiting for you." The delivery room buzzed with activity around them, but Freya noticed only the details of her daughter, the dusting of dark hair, the determined little fists, the perfect bow of her lips. Harrison's lips. Harrison, who wasn't there, who hadn't answered her calls, who had missed the birth of his child. "Ms. Winters, do you have a name selected?" the nurse asked gently, clipboard ready. Freya hesitated. Naming rights hadn't been discussed in their agreement. But in this moment, looking into the face that somehow combined her nose with Harrison's strong jawline, she couldn't imagine calling this child anything but the name that had come to her weeks ago. "Penelope," she said softly. "Penelope Hope." Hope. The thing she'd clung to through 9 months of physical discomfort and emotional turbulence. The thing that was rapidly fading as hours passed with no word from Harrison. They moved her to a recovery room, a private suite Harrison's insurance covered. Freya dozed between nursing attempts, learning the rhythm of new motherhood and stolen moments of consciousness. Penelope slept in the clear bassinet beside her bed, perfect and oblivious to the complicated circumstances of her arrival. It was nearly midnight when the door opened. Harrison stood frozen in the doorway, still wearing his business suit, looking utterly lost. His eyes were bloodshot, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. "I was in Vancouver," he said hoarsely. "Board meeting. My phone died, and when I finally got your messages." He stopped, swallowing hard. "I'm so sorry, Freya." She wanted to be angry. She deserved to be angry. But exhaustion and hormones left. Room only for raw honesty. "She's here," Freya whispered. "Come meet your daughter." Harrison approached the bassinet with the caution of someone nearing a precipice. When he looked down at Penelope, his sharp intake of breath was audible. "She's perfect," he breathed, reaching out one tentative finger to stroke the baby's cheek. "Absolutely perfect. Her name is Penelope," Freya said. "Penelope Hope." Harrison nodded, still transfixed. "It suits her." He stood there for what felt like hours, just watching the baby sleep. When Penelope stirred and began fussing, Freya expected him to back away. Instead, he looked at her with pleading eyes. "Can I hold her?" Freya nodded, and the nurse helped transfer the newborn into her father's arms. The moment Harrison cradled Penelope against his chest, something visibly shifted in him. His rigid posture softened, his breathing changed, and when Penelope wrapped her tiny hand around his finger, tears spilled down his face unchecked. "I didn't." "No," he whispered, "not to Freya, but to the child. I didn't know it would feel like this." He sank into the chair beside Freya's bed, still holding Penelope, and finally looked up at the woman who had given him this gift. "All these months, I kept my distance because I was terrified," Harrison confessed. "After Olivia left, I convinced myself I couldn't risk loving anything that deeply again, so I treated this like a transaction, clinical, manageable." His voice broke. "I was so wrong, Freya. So incredibly wrong." In that moment, watching Harrison fall in love with their daughter Freya glimpsed the possibility that had seemed so remote throughout her pregnancy. But experience had taught her caution, and her heart was too fragile for false hopes. "She needs her rest," the nurse interrupted, coming to take Penelope back to her bassinet. "And so do you, Miss Winters." Harrison reluctantly surrendered the baby, then turned back to Freya with new determination in his eyes. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Mending hearts, the first weeks of Penelope's life passed in a blur of midnight feedings, diaper changes, and the particular magic of watching a newborn discover the world. Harrison never did return to his penthouse. Instead, he slept on the pull-out sofa in Freya's living room, rising for the 2 a.m., crying without complaint, learning to change diapers with surprising deftness. "You don't have to stay," Freya told him one morning, finding him making coffee in her kitchen, dark circles under his eyes matching her own. "This wasn't our arrangement." Harrison looked at her over the rim of his mug. "I'm tearing up our arrangement," he said simply. "If you'll let me." Freya didn't know how to respond. The past 9 months had taught her to guard her heart, to expect disappointment. And yet, and yet Harrison had been present every day since Penelope's birth, handling business calls with a sleeping infant on his chest, bringing Freya tea when she was too exhausted to move, watching their daughter with undisguised adoration. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked, needing clarity. Before Harrison could answer, Penelope's cries echoed from the nursery. By unspoken agreement, the conversation was shelved. Days stretched into weeks. Harrison brought more of his things to Freya's apartment. He took paternity leave, shocking his executive team, but delighting Dr. Rajan, who called to check on the new family. They established routines and learned each other in new ways, not as friends, not quite as co-parents, but something undefined and fragile. One evening, with Penelope finally asleep after a fussy day, Freya found Harrison on the balcony, staring at the Seattle skyline. "She has your determination," he said, when Freya joined him. "And your smile." "She has your eyes," Freya replied. "And your impatience." They shared a tired laugh before lapsing into comfortable silence. The night air felt cleansing after a day confined indoors. "I need to ask you something," Harrison finally said, turning to face her. "And I need you to be completely honest." Freya nodded, her pulse quickening. "Why did you agree to be my surrogate? The real reason." The question she dreaded from the beginning. Freya looked away, gathering courage. "Because I couldn't bear to see you hurting after Olivia left," she began slowly. "Because I thought carrying your child would be the closest I'd ever get to... ... She stopped, the words sticking in her throat. "To what?" Harrison pressed gently. "To being loved by you," she finished, her voice barely audible. "I've been in love with you for years, Harrison. I thought I could compartmentalize it, keep it separate from this arrangement. But I was wrong. Every kick, every hiccup, every doctor's appointment made it harder to pretend." The silence that followed her confession seemed endless. Freya kept her eyes fixed on the distant Space Needle, illuminated against the night sky, afraid to see pity or rejection on Harrison's face. "Look at me," he finally said, his voice strangely rough. When she did, she found him much closer than before, his expression intense. "I've been such a fool, Freya." He reached out, hesitantly touching her cheek with trembling fingers. I kept my distance during the pregnancy because I was terrified of what I was starting to feel. After Olivia, I convinced myself I was broken, incapable of trusting or loving properly again. But watching you carry our child with such grace and strength, ... Double quotes, he shook his head, searching for words. And then seeing Penelope for the first time, this miracle you gave me, something shifted. I realized I'd been hiding from the most obvious truth. My best friend. The woman who has always been there, the one person I trust completely, is the woman I'm in love with. Freya felt dizzy, uncertain if she was interpreting his words correctly. Harrison, I love you, Freya, he interrupted, the words tumbling out as if he couldn't contain them any longer. Not as my friend, not as Penelope's mother, but as the woman I want to build a life with. If you'll have me. After everything I've put you through. From the nursery. Penelope began to cry, perfect timing for a child who already seemed to have inherited her mother's sense of dramatic moment. She needs us, Freya said, trying to process Harrison's declaration. Harrison smiled, taking her hand. She does. And I need you, both of you. Together they went to soothe their daughter, working in the synchronized dance they'd developed over weeks of shared parenthood. When Penelope settled again, Harrison drew Freya into his arms. I don't expect an answer tonight, he whispered against her hair. We have time. The first time since this began, we have all the time we need. But Freya had waited long enough. Rising on tiptoes, she pressed her lips to his. In answer, a kiss that spoke of patience, rewarded and hope fulfilled. Later, as they sat together on the sofa, Penelope sleeping peacefully between them, Harrison traced gentle patterns on Freya's hand. What changed your mind? She asked quietly. After maintaining such distance for so long, Harrison considered the question seriously. When I saw you in that hospital room, holding our daughter and singing to her through your tears, I realized I'd been so focused on protecting myself from potential pain that I was missing the miracle right in front of me. Not just Penelope, but you, your strength, your heart. He squeezed her hand. Some risks are worth taking, Freya. You and Penelope are worth everything. Outside, Seattle's perpetual rain began again, drumming softly against the windows. Inside, in the apartment that had somehow become a home for three, the silent agreement that had brought them together had transformed into something spoken aloud at last. A family built not from obligation, but from love that had been there. All along,